What's up everybody, I'm Matt Gary, and in this episode of Coding with the Fours, you and I are going to figure out how to create Lightning Web Components in Salesforce. We'll go over what they are, when to use them, why to use them. We'll go over things like what are decorators, what are the lifecycle hooks, and we'll of course build our own Lightning Web Component together. So stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll be able to confidently create your very own Lightning Web Components. All right, everybody. Today we are going to figure out how to create Lightning Web Components together. We'll figure out what they are, when to use them, why to use them. We'll, of course, figure out how to make them. We'll make one together, and then we'll find out a bunch of other things about Lightning Web Components, like the 4 main files that we work with, the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and XML files, what they mean, how to use them, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll go over some other things like lifecycle hooks in your JavaScript file for your LWC, and things like decorators in LWCs, when to use them, what they are, that kind of stuff. So we'll go over a bunch of other stuff too. So stick with me, and it's going to be a good time. Might be a long time, but it'll be a good time. Hopefully. I can't make any promises. I'll try. We'll start by just figuring out what LWCs are, what Lightning Web Components are, and why you would choose to use them. But before we get into all things related to Lightning Web Components, make sure if you actually enjoy this video to like it, because when you do, it gets out to more people just like you that want to learn about this stuff for free too. So if you enjoy the video, like it, and if you love it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now back to the good stuff. So in front of me, I actually have a Lightning Web Component that I built quite a while ago. It doesn't really look much like a Lightning Web Component, but there is one in front of me. A Lightning Web Component is basically a custom user interface element that you want to build, or you need to build for your users. You typically only want to use Lightning Web Components when you can't use an out-of-the-box method to display this information or display something to your users. So anytime that out-of-the-box Salesforce's UI doesn't work for you, and screen flows don't work for you, not that I love flows, but you still want to try to stay out of the box until you absolutely needed to get custom. And this will happen more often than not. I mean, almost every project I've ever been on, we've needed some kind of Lightning Web Component to be built because different businesses have different needs, and a lot of the times they require a custom user interface of some sort. So that's when Lightning Web Components come into play. In front of me, I have a Lightning Web Component I built over a weekend several years ago called the character counter component. So normally in Salesforce, you don't get character counts underneath your names. Well, I had several different clients that I worked for that have requested this, so I built what's called the character counter component, and it will count as you type down here, as you can kind of see, although that may be small on your screen. So you can see those character updates, and then it'll even alert you when you get further down the line, should have picked a smaller field, that you know you're running out or you have run out, and then it'll prevent you from typing. Something that Salesforce doesn't do normally, but lots of people would love to see. That's kind of an example of a Lightning Web Component that I've built, just so you get a good idea of it. They don't have to be these extravagant, unique looking things. They can fit right in and look just like Salesforce, and you never know it. Cool. So now we know what Lightning Web Components are, and we have seen a Lightning Web Component. We know when to use Lightning Web Components. You use them when you run out-of-the-box tools to get you the user interface that you require. When you get to that point, it's Lightning Web Component time. So let's figure out how to create a Lightning Web Component. Unlike most things in Salesforce, you can't create a Lightning Web Component in the developer console. Not that I'd suggest you do anything in the developer console, but you can't create a Lightning Web Component in the developer console. So you need to use an IDE or an integrated development environment of some kind that supports Salesforce. So my personal favorite is IntelliJ. I have a setup tutorial to show you how to set up and install IntelliJ as an IDE, which you can go take a look at, and I'll link in this video, of course. And then, of course, the free option that most people use is Visual Studio Code, which is what I'll be using here, since most Salesforce developers will at least start off using Visual Studio Code. If you're unfamiliar with Visual Studio Code, I do have a tutorial I made long ago that still holds true on how to set up and install Visual Studio Code for Salesforce development. So I will link that as well. You can go check that out. And once you have Visual Studio Code installed, come back here and we'll get to building a Lightning Web Component together. Cool. Now that you've got Visual Studio Code in front of you and you've got it set up for Salesforce development, we are going to create our first Lightning Web Component together. And to do that, all we are going to do is do Control-Shift-P and click or hit Enter on this Create Lightning Web Component option here. If you don't see this, just type in Create Lightning Web Component. It'll eventually show up. And hit Enter. We'll enter the name for our Lightning Web Component. There are a couple of rules for Lightning Web Components. The first letter of your Lightning Web Component has to be lowercase, and you can't use any special characters aside from underscores. So I'm going to just, create a demo LWC. I'm just going to make it, I don't know whether I've used that before, Lightning Web Component, like so. And you can name this whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You don't have to name it Demo Lightning Web Component. And now you should see over here on the left side a Lightning Web Component that was automatically generated for you called whatever you named it. In my case, it's Demo Lightning Web Component. And within it, you'll see 3 files in a test folder. I'm not going to go over just tests in this video because a couple years ago, I made a very elaborate just test video. So I will, of course, link that as well. Once we're done with everything in this video, I would say it's worth it to go check out the just test video because it is important, although not enough Salesforce developers do it, to create tests for your Lightning Web Components to make sure they work even after you change them, which is inevitable. So we've got our Lightning Web Component here. It has 3 files within it. Now typically you'll want a 4th file, and I'll show you how to do that. You'll just create a new file and say demo Lightning Web Component.css. Normally you will want this at one point or another. You're going to want a CSS file, most likely. And we'll get back to CSS in a little bit so I can show you how to leverage a CSS file eventually. But let's go through what these 4 files are first. So we have our CSS file, which we just made together. And what this is CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, which sounds strange, but basically this file is what you're going to use to make your Lightning Web Component look beautiful, pretty, whatever. Sometimes you don't need this because the Salesforce Lightning Design System, which we'll go over a little bit here, will be enough for you, but more often than not, you'll need at least some level of custom CSS or styling to make your Lightning Web Component look the way you'd like it to look. The second file we have here is our HTML file. And this HTML file is what we're going to use to tell our browser what to display to our users. So if we want to display an image, for instance, we are going to, through the use of this HTML, tell our browser we want to display an image. If we want to display text, we will tell it that we want to display text. All that kind of stuff, a table, anything like that. All of the stuff that we actually end up displaying is going to go here in this HTML. And we'll see that soon enough. Don't worry. Our third file here is our JavaScript file. And our JavaScript file is going to be what actually runs when your user interacts with this Lightning Web Component. So when your Lightning Web Component loads, where are we getting the data from or the information from to display in your HTML, right? Well, all of that is likely to come from your JavaScript. So as we'll see when we get to the part where, the part of this video where we retrieve data in our Lightning Web Component, you'll see that, data retrieval is done here. When you click a button in your HTML, it's going to call your JavaScript file to do whatever it is you want to happen after you click that button, right? So the JavaScript is basically where all the action takes place. Any action or data retrieval or whatever else that should take place, that's all going to be managed by your JavaScript, right? And then last on the list here is our XML file, which this is going to let us know where we can use the Lightning Web Component and what variables in the Lightning Web Component are configurable to our users. For instance, if I bring this back up and we take a look at this Lightning record page that I've got here, if it'll ever load. If I click on the character counter component, you can see over here on the right side, there's a bunch of different variables that you can fill out as the administrator or user or whoever's putting this in the page, right? So in our XML, we're going to inform our Lightning Web Component of two things. Where it can be placed in our Salesforce org. Can it be placed in a Lightning record page? Can it be placed in an Experience Cloud site? Can it be placed on a home page for a user? All that kind of stuff is going to be declared in this XML. And then the other thing that we can declare, as we'll eventually see here, are these variables that users can fill out when they place it on one of those pages. Of course, I'm not clicking on the right thing. But that's what that XML or configuration file is going to provide us. So now we have a general understanding, hopefully, of a Lightning Web Component. We know how to create it. We set up our IDE. We create the Lightning Web Component. And then we have those four main files, the CSS to style our component when we need custom styles, the HTML to tell our browser how we want to display our component to our users, the JavaScript where all the action takes place when a user interacts with your Lightning Web Component, and then your XML file that'll tell or inform Salesforce, rather, where you can place this component and what options or variables are configurable by end users. Cool. So now that we have taken a look at those things, we're going to figure out first how to display this Lightning Web Component on a page. So let's figure it out. So while we have yet to build anything in this LWC, I think it's important to first figure out how we would actually place this Lightning Web Component somewhere in our Salesforce org. At least that's the thing I always want to know. I've got a bunch of code in front of me on the screen, although not much of it yet. But how would I actually ever display this to my users? How would I put this on a page? That's what we're going to figure out first. So what you'll need to do is in your Lightning Web Component, open up your XML file. And then in your XML file, and I'll zoom in a little bit here, in your XML file, we're going to change a handful of things. We are first going to change this isExposed value to true, like so. Otherwise, you won't actually be able to drag and drop it onto the page, no matter what. And then we are going to create what are called targets, like so. So within this targets tag, we are going to create a target like this. And within these opening and closing target tags here, what we're going to do is tell it where we can place this LWC. So to do so, we're going to type in lightning __ record page. And there's a whole bunch of these targets you can choose from. Lightning record page is just one of them. There's, Lightning home page, there's Experience Cloud site pages, there's tons of other options for you to choose. But for Salesforce to know where you intend to use this and where it should be placed, you have to create this targets element here within your XML. And right now I'm telling it I would like to be able to place this on a Lightning record page. So I'm going to save this, and I think this might not deploy, which is probably good for me to show you this. Oh, it did run, but it probably shouldn't have. Over here in your CSS, if you try to deploy this right now, we created this CSS file. If you created it with me, it's empty. It will typically error if this is empty. So we just need to create something here for it to be comfortable with deploying the CSS into the org. This is not what the CSS file will end up being, but what we'll say is just .mydiv, and then we'll say display, for now, display is equal to none. It's not important that you know what any of this is right now. We're just adding it so that it will deploy our LWC into the org without complaining. Okay, so now we have officially prepped this to be able to be used in a Lightning record page. And if I bring back up my Salesforce org here, we'll see if we can indeed add it to this Lightning record page. So we'll click, you'll go to the Lightning record page you're interested in adding this to. We'll click Edit Page. I've got this wonderful cough that just won't go away. So if I cut the video more times than you're used to seeing, that's why. Now, over here in the left bar, we should be able to type in, I should have done demo, but it still found it. Demo Lightning Web Component, which is what we named our Lightning Web Component. And we can now drag and drop this wherever we want on the page like a normal component in the Lightning App Builder, right? So I can drag and drop this here. Now it's going to leave a little space for it here so that I know that it's here, but obviously we haven't put anything into this Lightning Web Component yet, so we're not going to see anything displayed here. Now, if you hate the name of this Lightning Web Component over here because it's pretty ugly looking, like pretty much all my custom components are, you can actually change that if you wanted to. In your XML file where we already were, you can change this to master, or you can add an XML element here called master label, like so. And then I can say, demo LWC to display. I don't know. Who knows? You can name it whatever you want. And that will, after this deploys, we'll see, that will allow us over here to have, a little bit cuter of a name, if you want to call it that, instead of its kind of developer name that just came with it. So cool, now we have a nice name for our Lightning Web Component, and we can drag and drop it at least onto Lightning record pages for now. All right, so now we probably want to figure out how to display things in our Lightning Web Component. So let's figure out how to create some things to actually show to our users in our custom Lightning Web Component. But there is something I should show you really quick before we actually start making updates to this Lightning Web Component. Otherwise, we're going to make updates to the Lightning Web Component and it is randomly not going to display for you because your browser has cached your old version of your Lightning Web Component and won't let go of it. So I'm going to pull up Salesforce really quick and show you how to make a slight adjustment in your org. You should only do this in dev orgs or sandbox orgs in general. But when you're building a Lightning Web Component, the browser has a tendency, because of the way that Salesforce is set up, or the way that the session settings are set up in Salesforce, to store your Lightning Web Component and not necessarily refresh it every single time you make an adjustment to your Lightning Web Component. So what we can do to solve this problem is we can go to Setup, right? And we can go to Session Settings and Setup. Click here, scroll up near the top where it says Caching. And here under the Caching section, we need to uncheck this second option, ensure or enable secure and persistent browser caching to improve performance. So by default, this gets checked in your org. But if you're building Lightning Web Components, the last thing you want to do is have this on. Otherwise, you're going to make changes to the UI and you're not going to see them get updated. So make sure that you turn this off and then we'll be good to go. And we can finally start making things to display in our LWC. So the first thing we're going to do to start figuring out how to display data to our users in this Lightning Web Component is open up our HTML file. Now, HTML is just a markup language. It's not super complicated by any means. There's just a lot of different elements, tags that you'll need to learn or reference from time to time that I'm not going to be able to go over in this video. Otherwise, it'd be like a 10-hour long video that nobody would ever watch. But there are lots of other good videos that go over HTML as well as resources, and I'll put those in the description of this video and you can go check those out. What we will do is just go over some basics of how HTML works to display data to our users. And we will go over some unique things about HTML specifically for Lightning Web Components, like the LWC component blueprints that are available, all that kind of stuff. So the first thing that we're going to do, if my cough doesn't annihilate me here in just a moment, is we're just going to start with something very simple. We're going to use a P element, or a paragraph tag is what this is called, to just display some text to our users. Now you could do plenty of other things in a paragraph tag. It's just meant to represent a block of elements clumped together, really, more than anything else. You could display images in it or whatever. But more often than not, what you'll use a paragraph tag for is to display some text. So within this P tag, in between these two P tags, what I'm going to do is just say, hi, this component exists. Yay. I'm so sorry. And then if we head back over to our account page, you can see it did show up over here where we placed it. Hi, this component exists. Yay. Now, if you're not seeing this, it's probably just because you didn't save your page when you dropped your component in. I don't think I actually clicked the save button when we were going through that earlier, but if you don't see it, just make sure to go back over here, find your component, drop it in the page, and this time actually hit save, right? Like so. Cool. And now it should say, hi, this component exists. Yay. Amazing. So now you know how to at least display something in your Lightning Web Components. Now, there's a ton of other HTML tags that I'm not going to go over that are, you'll definitely use from time to time, like the image tag to display images, the A tag to display links, and there's tons more. However, in LWCs, you have this pretty cool stuff available to you and the kind of pre-built LWC components. So in front of me, I have a Lightning tab set. So normally in HTML, if I wanted to create a tab set like you see up here, item 1, 2, 3, stuff like that, it would be a lot more complicated. There'd be a lot more HTML involved for me to create this Lightning tab set and display it to my users, or these tabs rather, and display them to our users. There's also tons of other stuff that's pre-built for you in LWCs, like this carousel component that isn't displaying itself very well in their page, especially with the zoom I have on here. Lots of other stuff. One of the most popular ones is the Lightning data table, where you can display records to your users. And another good one is Lightning file upload. This is a huge, very, very valuable one. I'm not going to go over it in depth in this video, but just know if you need to upload a file, there is a component that's already pre-built for you to use. And there are tons of other ones to check out as well. The one that I am going to use just to show you how you would use these is the Lightning input component, which is pretty useful in my opinion. What we'll do over here, say we wanted our users to be able to input some kind of text, we can just drop in Lightning input, type text. They have some other options as well. And then my label here can be enter some text, or I'll say, tell me your favorite Taco Bell menu item. If people get tired of my videos, it's going to be because I talk about Taco Bell way too much. Anyway, now, if I come over here, now that that hopefully saved and deployed because I wasn't paying attention, we should have an input box here. Pretty cool. But my answer is the number 6 with beef and spicy ranch sauce. You're welcome. Cool. So now we kind of have this understanding of our HTML, right? We can use it to start telling the browser what we want to display and how we want to display it. And more importantly, you now know that this component blueprint library exists, which will save you an enormous amount of time, especially if you're creating things for internal Salesforce users where you want things to look and feel like Salesforce anyway. These pre-built components here are going to really make that quite a bit easier. So make sure to check them out and use them whenever you can. Otherwise, you're probably just wasting really your own time. So make sure to check those out. I'll have a link to that, of course, in the description, just like all the other things. And you can check out all of the other component blueprints as well. So cool. Now we know how to display things in HTML, but we still need to figure out 2 other things. We know how to display things in HTML. We know how to put this Lightning Web Component on a page, but how do we make it look pretty? And how do we actually, have some interactions with our user, when they click on a lightning input or they click on a button or whatever else, or how do we preload data into the page, anything along those lines, right? How do we do those things in our Lightning Web Component? So the next thing that we'll take a look at is our JavaScript file. And this is probably going to be the area where you spend most of your time learning. JavaScript is at this point, a pretty decent sized scripting language. And there's a lot to cover with JavaScript. There's no way in this video I could cover everything you need to know about JavaScript. Again, I will link at least one video in the description that is an excellent JavaScript tutorial on YouTube that I've used in the past. So you can check that out if you want to go even more in depth with JavaScript than I'm going to get here today. But now we're going to figure out a whole lot of things. The first of which is just how do we get values in JavaScript and pass them to our HTML, right? Because that's probably the first thing we want to figure out is, okay, in my JavaScript, I can retrieve data from my Salesforce instance, either via Apex or via the UI record API, which we'll talk about in a minute, or whatever other means, right? But how would I actually push that back to my HTML? And it's actually pretty simple, and I'm just going to show you a quick example, and then we'll get into more detailed examples together. Before I show you how to display JavaScript data in your HTML, I should really quick just go over some extreme basics of JavaScript with you, just in case you've never done any of this before, which many of you may have not. A couple things are important here. When you create a Lightning Web Component, it automatically creates a JavaScript class for you. So right here, we have this JavaScript class built for us. And within this class, we can do a couple of things. I mean, we can do a whole world of things, really, but there are a couple of key things to have a general grasp of. The first is declaring class properties, or what many people will refer to as class variables. To declare a variable in JavaScript is a little bit different than Apex. If you're used to working in an Apex, there's no typing in JavaScript. So there's no concept of like a string or an integer or a Boolean or anything like that. You don't have to, when you declare your variables, you don't have to tell it what type. So for instance, in Apex, if I wanted to declare a variable, I would say something like Boolean, and then my variable name is equal to true or something like that, right? But you can see it's already complaining about this because in JavaScript, we don't need that. We just need the name of the variable that we want to use and then assign it a value, and by assigning it a particular value, you've essentially assigned it its type. It doesn't need to know it ahead of time. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a variable is just a way to store a value for you to be able to use in the rest of your JavaScript, right? In this instance, this class property or this class variable now has a value, the value of true, stored in it, and I can use it throughout the rest of the code that I write in this Lightning Web Component. Now, there's a bunch of different variable types. This is what's referred to as a string, basically any type of text like this. You'll hear people refer to this as a string. You can also use an integer or a number type, a decimal type. You can create what are referred to as objects or JSON objects, JavaScript object notation. where you can create objects within here, arrays, lots of other things. So a variable can store an enormous amount of things in it. But again, all a variable is just a container. It's a container to store values that you would like to use later in your code, as we'll see while we're building things in this video. The second thing is a method. And a method is declared like this. And what the method is going to do is provide you a way to easily execute a block of code. So I could put a bunch of code in here, right? I'm just going to create a comment that says code, but eventually we'll see that we'll create these methods that our HTML will call, or maybe other methods within our LWC will call. And all the method is going to do is represent some kind of logic or some kind of task that you want your code to do. And by calling this particular method, you will execute that task, right? So maybe in here, eventually I create a button, and that button calls this method, and this method executes a bunch of code that I wanted to happen. You know, with by pressing that button in my HTML. So this is the very basics, and there's so much more to learn about JavaScript. But before I get into actually building anything, I just wanted you to have a general understanding of what a variable is and what a method is. A variable is a way to store value, store a value or multiple values, like you see here. And a method is a way to essentially containerize logic. It's a container for logic, or a container for a task, to represent a task that you want done. So when we build methods and when we create variables, that's what we're doing with them. And you'll see that as we you know, build things out together over the course of this video. So anyway, let's get back to figuring out how to retrieve data, display data from our JavaScript in our HTML. So what I'm going to do first is create what's referred to as a class property, or more often people will just call it a class variable. And we'll do so by just declaring it like this. We'll say, I don't know, header text, and then we'll set this equal to, this is that heat header, my guy. I'm sorry, I don't know why anybody puts up with this. And now I have this variable in my JavaScript that I can display in my HTML. So if I come back over here in my HTML, make sure to just copy this value, header text, so you don't forget it. And if we wanted to display this here, or actually let's create a header tag. We'll say h1 like so, and then we'll put curly brace, header text, curly brace like so. And this is really all it takes to pull some data from your JavaScript and display it in your HTML. I know we're not doing much here, but you're going to see that we're going to do this kind of same thing over and over again. So cool. Now that we have that set up, if we reload our page, we can see this is that heat header, my guy. Okay, cool. So now we know how to set up a variable or a class property in our JavaScript and display it in our HTML to our users. Now, the question is, how do we actually get data from our Salesforce org and display that to our users, right? Say, for instance, I wanted to pull all of the information about, I don't know, the running user, right? Maybe you're making this for an Experience Cloud page. Maybe you're making this for a home page or something, and you want to say, welcome back, Matt, to your Salesforce org. Good to see you, or something like that. I don't immediately have access to any of that information, but I can, through the use of JavaScript here, retrieve that information and then display it to our users. So we're going to try that first using the UI API and what's called the wire adapter, and then we are going to see how to do that using what's called imperative apex, or reaching out to apex to retrieve that data together. So yeah, let's figure that out. Before we get into actually retrieving data and showing it to our users, though, we should probably go over what are referred to as the decorators in Lightning Web Components. The API decorator, the wire decorator, and the track decorator, and figure out what those actually mean. So let's go through them. All right, in Lightning Web Components, there are 3 different decorators, all of which are extremely important to know exist and have an understanding of, because they're all extremely useful, and you will definitely need them at one point or another. Now, if the word decorator is confusing, trust me, in just a minute or two, it's not going to be confusing anymore once you see how they are used. But there are 3 of them, and they are the API decorator, the track decorator, and the wire decorator. And to be able to use any of them, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. To be able to use any of these decorators, you have to first import them in this statement up here, in this import statement up here. If you don't import them in this statement, like I've done here, if you try to use them, your Lightning Web Component will tell you, I don't know what you're talking about, bro. I never heard of any of those things, so I can't help you. So make sure you import them. You don't have to import all of them. You only have to import the decorators that you're actually using. So if you just use the API decorator, you know, just import the API decorator like that. But I'm going to use all 3 so that I can show you how they work. Okay, so the first one that we're going to go over is the API decorator. And in my opinion, this is the easiest one to understand. The API decorator basically works as follows. When I decorate a variable or a method with the API decorator, I am declaring to my Lightning Web Component that it is a publicly accessible property, meaning that if I had a parent Lightning Web Component or a child Lightning Web Component, which we'll go over near the end of this video, how to do that, how to communicate between them. If I have a variable here that is decorated with the API or @API decorator, then I am saying my child and parent components can use this variable. They can update it, they can change it, they can do whatever, right? So if I made this variable recordId decorated with the API decorator, it is now accessible to my other components that are potentially nested within this component. Now, the reason this is called a decorator is because I could just declare recordId like this, right? This is a class property or variable declaration. But if I want to make it publicly accessible, like we just talked about, I have to decorate it with that @API decorator here. And specifically for the @API decorator, you can also do this for a method. So I could say, you know, method name, whatever. And that way I can make this method publicly accessible to other Lightning Web Components as well. But I don't have to do that. But if I did decorate it with that, my method is now publicly accessible. So that's why they call it a decorator. It's decorating, or really declaring to your LWC a new intent or a new thing that the LWC has to be aware of, that you want to do with this particular method or variable, right? Cool. And with the API decorator in particular, there are two cool things that I want to talk about before we move on to the other two decorators. The first of which is, if you are using your Lightning Web Component on a Lightning record page, much like we are doing, you can use this @API decorator to retrieve the record ID of the record you are currently viewing. So if I was on this account page, right, just by doing this, without doing anything else, I'm going to get access to my account's record ID, which I will just show you by replacing this here with the value record ID. And hopefully after this saves, we'll be able to see it get displayed in our LWC. Oh man, that save's taking a minute for a second there. All right, so if I reload this now, just with that, it's probably going to complain. I get this issue every once in a while. It's kind of annoying, in my opinion. Or if I add @record ID after the fact, for some reason it won't update unless I go to the Lightning record page and just click it. Oh, see, there it is. Super annoying. So if you add the @API record ID after you've already placed this component into a page, occasionally it won't display itself until you go back to the Lightning record page just to save and reload this component. Back to the Lightning record page builder, that is. Super annoying. But now you can see it is displaying the record ID for this account. Pretty cool. I didn't have to do anything for that. I just had to create a variable called record ID and decorate it with the API decorator. Now you can also do this with one other thing called the objectApiName. And just by declaring this variable with this particular name and decorating it with the API decorator, I can now get my objectApiName without doing, pretty much anything. So I'll add that in here, save it, and once it saves, come on, you can do it. I believe in you. Once it saves, we can come back here and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to do the same thing to me again. Where, because I'm using that API variable, there it goes. So now you can see it is indeed displaying the value account like before. When you add those API decorators, from time to time, for some reason, the Lightning App Builder wants to be weird and force you to go back to it just to be able to see what it outputs. So now you know a couple of useful things. If you're not seeing the output you expect, it's because Salesforce is weird. Okay, cool. So now we know a whole bunch about the API decorator makes a publicly accessible property that our parent and child components can access. And we can use it for a couple of unique things for Lightning record pages, like retrieving the record ID of your currently viewed record and the objectApiName of your currently viewed record. This only works on Lightning record pages, though, just for awareness. Okay. If you try to do this on a home page, there's no record ID on a home page. you know, or object API name, so it just wouldn't work out, you know. All right, cool. We know what the @API decorator does. Let's move on to the track decorator. The track decorator is one that I think people still occasionally get confused on because it has changed in its usefulness over time, which is actually a good thing. But back when LWCs were originally introduced, a hot minute ago now, like 6 years or something, 7 maybe. I've been around a long time. Anyway, back when they were originally introduced, if you wanted variables, so say for instance, I was still displaying this header text, which I'll just go back to here. Say for instance, I was still displaying this header text in my HTML. Back when LWCs released, if I wanted to change my header text in my JavaScript somewhere, like maybe in this method, I changed my header text like so. I don't know why that's the first thing that came to my head. But if I wanted to change the header text to, you know, from this value to that value, back when LWCs released, you'd have to have @track here to be able to update it in your HTML template in your Lightning Web Component. Otherwise, it wouldn't re-render in the HTML template and show you this new value that you set it to. However, that is no longer the case. It hasn't been for several years. If you have a variable that is, to keep things simple, if you have a variable that is a simple variable, something that is a string or maybe just a number or, you know, something simplistic like that, a Boolean, a true, false value, whatever, you don't need @track anymore. You only need @track when you have a more complex variable you're working with, like an array or an object or a set or a map, something like that. So if I have, you know, like an example object like so, which there's nothing in this object, but if I had this object and I intended to change it in my JavaScript code, then I need @track on this object to be able to make sure that its values update appropriately in my HTML template. Without @track on your more complex variables, you're going to not see them update appropriately in your HTML template. So that's when you add @track. When you have an array, an object, a set, a map, something along those lines that is a more complex data type, you'll want to use @track to make sure when you update it somewhere in your JavaScript, that update gets displayed appropriately in your HTML template for your Lightning Web Component. Cool. So now you know. Now you know a little bit of the history of track and when to actually use it these days. All right, so let's figure out how to use the wire adapter to pull in data about a Salesforce record without ever having to reach out to Apex at all to get this done. We're going to use what's referred to as the Lightning Data Service. I constantly refer to it as the UI Record API, which is not really right. It's just, as you'll see when we import it in a second, it says UI Record API, so I frequently say that. But it's more commonly and accurately referred to as the Lightning Data Service, which will allow us to retrieve data from our Salesforce instance without ever having to reach out to Apex. So to do that, we are going to import a couple things. We've already imported the wire adapter, so that's a huge plus. And it's already auto-completing this for me, which is nice, probably because I've recorded this a couple times now. And it thinks it knows me. It probably does. Anyway, okay, so I've imported this get record and get field value function from the UI record API, as you can see here. And now what we're going to do is use the wire adapter to run this get record method and retrieve information about a record in our system. Now, I could use the record ID of the record that we're already on, but that's not really fun, in my opinion. Why not show you how to do something new, you know? So what I'm going to show you how to do next is how to get the running user's ID in your Lightning Web Component. And it's pretty simple. All you have to do is say import ID from @Salesforce user ID, like that. And then I will create a user ID class property or variable and assign this ID to it. And now all of a sudden I have access to my running user's ID. So what we're going to do is use this running user ID to retrieve a little bit more information about our user and display that to them. Maybe their username or maybe their name and their email, something like that. But to be able to do that, I need to import the field from the Salesforce schema into my Lightning Web Component. So we're going to do a couple more import statements because this is important to know, right? And I'm going to move this up here. You don't need to do this. It's just kind of to make it easier for you guys to see everything. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit, a little bit more. So the next thing we need to do is when we run this get record method or this get field record, get field value method or function rather, we're going to need to pass it a field that we want it to retrieve, or fields that we want it to retrieve in the case of get record. So the way that we do that in a Lightning Web Component anyway is we use the Salesforce schema to import those field references. So what we're going to do is we'll say import name from, it's not quite right, Salesforce schema. Did I say that? Yeah, okay. This autocomplete is really throwing me off here. User dot first name, right? I'll do first name here just to make that clear. And then I also want to import email from @Salesforce schema user email. There, the autocomplete was right that time. Actually helpful and not super confusing. And then what we will do, just to make things a little easier to use, is we'll create an array of fields. And so up here we'll create a constant, which is just a variable that after you declare it can't change, with some small exceptions with objects. We won't get into that, but there is what we're going to create here is just a variable called a constant, or that I'm going to declare as a constant, which means that after I set it here, you typically, in the vast majority of situations, cannot change anything about it. And inside of our array, we are going to pass in the first name value here and the email value here. And now we have our array of fields that we're going to pass into our get record method here in just a moment. All right, I think we've talked about it enough. Let's actually use the wire adapter to retrieve data from our Salesforce org and display it in our Lightning Web Component. So what we're going to do is actually use this autocomplete. That's surprisingly accurate, probably because I have tried to record this many times unsuccessfully. But I will explain what it auto-completed for us. So we have our wire decorator here. And our wire decorator is always going to take two parameters. It's going to take the name of a function and the parameters that that function requires or accepts when it runs, right? And down here we have another method, right, called method name. A parameter, because I don't think I described this before, and if you're unfamiliar with it, I want to make sure you know. A parameter would be like if I right here said record ID and fields, right? And then I could, from another method, say method 1 or something, I could call this dot method name and pass it in 2 values, like so, right? So these are parameters, and this is what this configuration object holds, is the parameters for this getRecord method, right? And we're going to pass it 2 values that we have yet to fill out. Well, this was actually auto-filled out for us, but I'll explain that. So this getRecord method takes 2 parameters. 1, the record ID, kind of like you see here, and 2, the fields that we want to retrieve for that record to store in this user variable here. So for fields, this actually got auto-completed correctly, right? For this fields parameter, we want to send in this fields array that we set up a little bit earlier, and so we are just going to pass it in the name of that array right there. So that part is done. But now we need to set up what's called a reactive property, a reactive variable. And to do that, we'll do $user ID. And that user ID comes from this class property, or frequently referred to as class variable, user ID here, right? And then we put the $sign in front of it to make it reactive. And what that means is if the user ID variable, if its value changes at all in this Lightning Web Component for one reason or another, maybe you want to pass in a new user to get their record information, if this variable changes, it's going to cause this wire decorator to run the getRecord method again and update this user variable that it ends up assigning the outcome of getRecord to new values, right? So anytime this changes, the wire adapter runs again and we get new values to display. And I'll show you that here in just a second. So last here is that when this wire decorator runs this getRecord method, it's going to store the return value into this user record, or sorry, this user variable right here that's right underneath the wire method. In this case, it's going to return a JavaScript object, which is very similar to this, right? This is technically an object here. It's going to return to us an object that has all of our record data in it, as we'll see in just a moment. Okay, so that was a lot. I hope I've explained this well, but if not, we're going to do some more with this in just a second, and hopefully it will clarify things. So we are going to next create what is called a getter method. So we've got this wire method set up. It's retrieving our user record data, which we'll see here in just a second, and it's storing it in this user class property or variable. You can use either name, but technically the right name is class property, which is why I keep saying it, and why you can even see right here it says property. So we're going to store it in this class property called user, and down here in this getter method that we're going to set up, we are going to retrieve the first name value from this user record. Now, as far as why I'm setting up a getter method, it's for 2 reasons. Number one, it makes it easier to display the outcome of a function, or the return value of a function in your HTML, and because I want you to learn about getter methods because they're very useful. You don't always have a great way of, or you don't always want to just display a variable, kind of like we did here for header text. Sometimes you want to display the outcome of a function, right? When a function runs or a method runs, whatever you want to call it, you want to display what its what its return value is, what its outcome ultimately is. And this getter method allows us to do that. So if I don't put get in front of a method, kind of like I do down here, then I can't display the return value of this method in my HTML over here. But because I have this get in front of it, I've created a getter method, and it will allow me to display its return value, much like I was able to display this header text variable up here. So it'll allow me to, in my HTML, display the outcome of the first name method, which is pretty cool. So I'm setting up this getter method, and I am returning from this method, this first name method, the results of the get field value function call. So up here in the Lightning UI record API, or the Lightning Data Service, we have imported the function get field value. And down here, we are actually running the function get field value by passing in this .user.data, which I will briefly explain. This is literally just referring to the Lightning Web Component itself, right? It's saying this Lightning Web Component's user property, and because this user property is an object, it has a value in this object, much like here, if I change this to data, right? It's the same kind of idea. It has a value in this user object called data. So I'm saying in this LWC, please, use the user property, and from the user property, retrieve the data attribute, right? Or the data property, actually, from the user property. Kind of confusing, but basically just know that this is a way to access properties of a JavaScript object, which are like this. So a property of a JavaScript object. This is a JavaScript object up here, right? I could do data : hi, or something like this. And down here, if I wanted to, I could say this dot example object dot data, right? And this would basically output the value hi. Cool. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. That's essentially what we're doing right here. And so now that we have passed in our data, or our user, or our record data rather, into this get field value, we also want to tell it what field we want to actually retrieve from this data. In our case, we want the first name. So many things. Hopefully that was easy to understand, or at least somewhat easy to understand, but that's what we're doing here. Now, we're going to do the same thing for email. It's literally the exact same thing, with the exception of the method name being email and us passing in the email field instead of the first name field that we imported up here. That's it. And now we're actually going to make one last method called change user ID. So I'm just going to say change user ID like this. And then just to make this super, super simple for right now, I'm just going to say, I'm going to say this dot user ID. Again, this LWC's user ID property up here. That's what I'm doing here. And I'm going to set this equal to a user ID value, which I don't have on me. So let's go find one really quick. I have this user called Snorlog a batch baby. So sorry. I'm going to put this ID in here and save this LWC. Now, we're going to do a few things to set this up so we can see all of this wire magic happen at once. The first thing is, while I set up the first name getter method to be displayed, I didn't set up the email method to be displayed, so I'm going to do the same thing here. Again, the name of my getter method is email, and I'm just putting it in curly braces to display whatever it returns from this getFieldValue method here. And the second thing I'm going to do, I actually already did because I recorded this, so I'm just going to delete this. We'll do it again. I'm going to use a lightning button, and we'll say change user ID, and this will call not method 1, but the change user ID method, like so. And so what this onClick does is when you click the button, this is basically an event that you can trigger. So when you click the button, it will call this method name that you set up right here. So we've got this lightning button. When we click it, it's going to call that change user ID method and change our user from me, the currently running user, to whatever that crazy user's name was that I just mentioned before. So let's save this. And it's going to look ugly, but you know, who cares? And cool. Now I will bring back up my dev org. Oh, one thing really quick. Just really quick before we see this. Please never actually do this. Don't ever hard code an ID in here. There's a better way to do this. I am only doing this to show you this quickly. If you ever want to change a user's ID, make sure you do it in a way that you're not hard coding an ID. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a user ID, it's any ID. Never hard code IDs because they are not the same between your production and your sandbox environments. I'm only doing this to demo this to you very quickly. If you do this in a real scenario, your code will break. So I just want to show you the reactive property really quick. Okay, cool. So I am going to reload this page, and we can see, maybe, let me zoom in a little because this is small. We can see that it does retrieve my name and display it. It does retrieve my email address and display it, which is pretty cool, right? I didn't call out to Apex. I didn't do anything like that. All I did was use that Lightning data service and the wire adapter to retrieve this information. And now if I click this change user ID button that we set up, you should see this change to the other user's information. And we do. The first name of my user now is Snorlaga and as my other email address. So there you go. Pretty quick, pretty easy, nothing too crazy, although there is a lot to understand because there's a lot going on in JavaScript and frankly in Lightning Web Components. Cool. So now that we have a general understanding of how to use the wire decorator to retrieve data using the Lightning data service, which, by the way, there's a lot more to the Lightning data service than just this right here. There's a bunch of other methods, so definitely check out the Lightning data service, or LDS for short, and see the other ways that you can retrieve data and bring them into your Lightning Web Component. This isn't it, but if I went over every single one, I don't think this video would ever end. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is figure out how to create an Apex controller and interact with that Apex controller in our Lightning Web Component. So let's figure that out. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is actually create an Apex class. So let's do that. If you're in Visual Studio Code, you'll do Control-Shift-P, and then you'll run this create Apex class command up here. If you don't see it, just type in create Apex class, and it'll show up. Then we'll name it something. I'm just going to name this demo LWC controller, like so. I know a lot of people hate underscores in class names, but I love them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So now that we have this class created for us, what I'm going to do is do @aura enabled, like so. And this autocomplete looks generally accurate, so I'm going to leave it for now, but change this method name to get accounts, like so. So what we have set up here is an aura enabled method, which this decorator here at aura enabled is going to allow us to actually import this into a Lightning Web Component. If we don't have this above our method, or we don't have our method decorated with this, we won't be able to import it into our Lightning Web Component, and yeah, that's the end of the story. You can't use it. So make sure if you want to use an Apex method in your Lightning Web Component to use @aura enabled. Now, you can use Apex methods in two different ways, right? You can do what's called, or use it in a fashion that's called imperative Apex calls, which is what I'm going to show you. Or you could use this in a wire method, much like we just did over here for our Lightning Data Service or UI Record API methods, this getRecord method here. Now, I'm not going to show you the wire method because it's mostly the same as this. I will provide some documentation in the description that shows you how to do that if you are interested in it. But it's mostly the same idea as what we just went through. If you did want to use this in a wire method, though, you would need one more thing after this aura enabled decorator. You do parentheses, cacheable equals true. Without that, you can't use this in a wire adapter. So if you do want to use your Apex in a wire adapter as opposed to what I'm about to show you, which is an imperative Apex call, you know, don't forget to add that. But I want to show you imperative Apex now that I've got through that cough, because for a couple of reasons. Number one, you get the most flexibility out of your Lightning Web Components, as in you can do anything you can think of and make extremely dynamic LWCs using imperative Apex calls, whereas with the wire adapter, there's a bunch of limitations that you're going to run into. Plus, you know, it's good to learn something new instead of what we just talked about, right? So, cool. So what this is actually going to, we've got this method set up. We also have to make it public and static. Can't remember if I said that or not, but make sure that your method is public and static. Otherwise, if you try to save this, it won't save. It'll complain that for an aura enabled method, it needs to be public and static. So there you go. I'm also going to change this to return a list of accounts like that. And I'm going to have it take a parameter called account name so that we can see how to pass parameters into our Apex method as well. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to say return. This is, I think, right. We're going to return a query, a SOQL query from here to our Lightning Web Component. And it's just going, this SOQL query is going to give us a list of accounts, right? So I've got ID, name, from account, where name is, I'm just going to put equal to. Like is actually better for something like this, but to keep this simple, I'm going to say where name is equal to account name and limit it to 5 results. So what this method will do is it will receive an account name. It'll query using SOQL to retrieve all of the accounts with that account name and then return it to us. And as far as this try catch is concerned, this is typically how I set up basically every single aura enabled method. You'll do a try to do whatever operation it is you're doing in your Apex, and then you'll catch an exception in case this fails for one reason or another, and throw a new aura handled exception. Normally you want to make the error messaging a little nicer than just e.getMessage, which is the exception message. But for our purposes, I'm just going to leave this alone to keep this simple. This is a really nice way to get this done, and you typically almost always want to use Aura-handled exceptions for Aura-enabled methods, because it'll create an exception that's easy to parse and display in your Lightning Web Component. Yeah, cool. So we've set this up. Let's save it. And if we go back to our Lightning Web Component now, we should be able to import that method, getAccounts, much like we imported the method here from the UI Record API or the Lightning Data Service. So what we're going to do is say import get accounts from, oh, you got it right, from @Salesforce Apex Demo LWC controller, which is the name of the class I just made, and then getAccounts, which is the name of the method I just made. That's it. Now you've imported it, and you can use this Apex method if you want to. Now there are a couple ways to call an Apex method. I'm just going to create, we'll just create it up here. I'm just going to create a method here that says, I don't know, get accounts, because that makes sense, right? And there are two ways we can call get accounts inside of this JavaScript method. We can do what it's suggesting here, which is get accounts, the name that I've assigned it up here in the import statement, and the cough is killing me, bro, and pass it in the variable name, much like we did up here. We're going to pass it in this configuration object that stores the parameter name we expect, which is account name, and then it just, the autocomplete filled it with the value test, but we can put anything here, any string here. And then we'll say when this runs, then execute this code, and if it fails, which is this .catch, then display this console log error. Right? Now, an important thing to understand about imperative Apex calls when you do them this way is that they will operate asynchronously, which means that if I had some code here, it would operate before I called getAccounts, but if I had some code down here, more code, this code actually might operate, it is likely to operate before getAccounts is done retrieving data from the Apex controller and returning the result to us, right? So it's very important to know that these Apex controller calls, when you set them up like this, as we have them right now, are going to be asynchronous calls, meaning that other code can happen while we wait for the outcome of this Apex class running, or this Apex method rather running. Alternatively, we can do what's called await, or awaiting, or we can we can set this up so that you can await this code or this Apex method to make sure it runs before this more code down here theoretically runs as well. But to do that, we would have to make this an asynchronous method, like so, and we would have to put await in front of our method here, right? So there you go. If you don't want your Apex method to run asynchronously, make sure to set things up in this manner. If you want this if you want this code to only run after your Apex method runs, make sure to set it up this way. Now there is an alternative method. I do like this outcome here, but sometimes you don't need this much control, right? I personally prefer this. I'll just put it this way. this is the way that I pretty much always write my Apex calls. However, in the documentation for imperative Apex calls, you will also see it suggested that you just use try catch instead. What am I doing? Like that. I'm losing it. Too much video. And what you can do instead is just do this. We'll say like, let result equal this. And this will assign the, you know, whatever happens in your Apex method, whatever your Apex method returns, rather, to this result variable, right? Which is a little different than what we have down here. You can do it this way. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way. Honestly, you can do it either way, and you get the same outcome. Personally, I prefer this approach because I think it's easier to read. But you could approach calling your Apex class either way. Okay, cool. So I've got this getAccounts JavaScript method that is calling my getAccounts Apex method and passing it the account name test. That's not really what I want yet, or what I want at all. So let me go find the ridiculous names of my accounts. So I've got Jambo James Express, so I'm just going to take that name and drop it in here. You'll want to put in a name of one of the accounts in your org if you're doing the same thing as me. And then I'm going to create another class property, and I'm going to call it account records is equal to that. An array is equal to an array, because that's what we're going to get. Actually, I don't want to set it to anything. You don't need to set it to anything. That's not a requirement. And then I'm going to just say this dot account records is equal to result. So let me explain what's happening a little more in depth. First, we are awaiting our Apex class to running. We're waiting for it to finish before we execute any more code below it. Then we're calling our Apex class via this variable that we set up when we import it. Next, we are passing in the parameter that this getAccounts method requires, which is the account name in this instance. And what we're doing next is saying, okay, when this method, when this Apex method successfully runs, then we want to take the result or the return value of this method and do the following here within this arrow function is what this is called. So within this arrow function, we can do pretty much whatever we want. And in this case, all I'm going to do is assign the account records equal to the result of our Apex class, or the return value from our Apex class, like so. And then what we're doing after that is we're saying .catch, which is in the event that this Apex method fails, we need to catch the error and display the error in the console, like so. Cool. So now, now we have an imperative Apex method set up. I'm going to save this, and what I'm going to do, so we don't have to build a whole bunch of stuff in our HTML, I'm going to say console.log, plus you really need to know how to do this anyway. I'm going to say console.log, these are the account records. This dot account records, like so. Cool. And we'll save this. And I will open back up. Did it save? Are we good? Okay, cool. I'm going to bring back over Salesforce. We've got our component over here. I'm going to refresh this, and we're not going to see anything change at all. But because we use this console log, we should be able to find this in what's called the browser console. This is extremely helpful for debugging things in Lightning Web Components. So the way that we're going to do this is you're going to right-click on the page, click Inspect, and once this inspector loads, you'll click on Console. And you know what? I haven't built anything to call this method, so it will never be called. Let's build something to call this method. Maybe I will just, over here in the controller, oops, wrong thing. Over here in the HTML, on this, for this lightning button, I'm going to create another lightning button. And we will call it get account. We will give it the label get accounts, but we'll have it call the method get accounts that we just set up, right? This guy right here. Cool. Then we'll save this. And once it deploys, we'll try this again. It's important to have a way to actually call your method that you set up. All right, so once again, we're on this page. There's nothing here except for this new Get Accounts button. We need to right-click, do Inspect, go over here to Console. I'm going to click this little button up here to clear the console to remove all of this other random junk that's not really relevant to what we're trying to look at. And then we'll click the Get Accounts button, right? And it did nothing. Oh, that is because I'm filtering. Weird. Okay, I don't know. Must be an old filter from earlier in the day or something. But cool. So we clicked on this Get Accounts button, and we received, these are the account records, object, right? I clicked it a bunch of times out of confusion, more than anything. So just know, if you have a filter up here, make sure to delete it, unlike I did before I started doing this with you. Anyway, so this says these are the account records, object. Not particularly helpful. But we do know that it at least did run. So how could we display this .account records? Well, this is, because this is an array of records, right? It's an array of accounts, or a list of accounts, rather. It's a JSON object. It gets returned anyway to our, my phone is blowing up. It gets returned to us as a JSON object from the Apex class. So we're going to say json.stringify account records. And this will allow us to view that object really easily in our browser console. So again, once this deploys, I'm going to bring this back over here. We're going to refresh this. I'm going to clear all of this junk, click the Get Accounts button, and then we should see these are the account records, ID, name, right? Because those are the only two fields that we retrieved in the controller here. If I had added more fields, more of them would show up in this console. So there you go. We made an imperative Apex call. We set up our Apex controller. We made sure that the method that we wanted to call in it was Aura enabled. We imported our getAccounts method into this controller, or sorry, into this Lightning Web Component. I'm sorry. We imported our Apex method getAccounts into our Lightning Web Component using this import statement. And then we set up an a getAccounts method in our LWC that called out to our Apex controller and returned those results to us. Cool. Now you know how to do imperative apex. I am very sorry if that was long-winded and you know, I probably said a lot of words that I shouldn't, like I'm doing right now. Anyway, now you know how to do that. One thing I want to go over is just these console logs, right? You're going to find these to be particularly useful when you're debugging things, as we just saw. When you're debugging LWCs. This is probably the next thing we should go over before I get into some of the last sections of this very long YouTube video. When you're debugging Lightning Web Components, there are a couple of things that are very useful to you. I'm not going to go over everything in this browser console debugger, but I will provide a video that goes over all of the debugging or all of the techniques you can use for debugging in this browser console. But I want to show you some of the a couple of the ways that you can access your Lightning Web Component and debug it. So the first is using that console log statement, right? This is extremely valuable. If you are having failures, if you're having results get returned improperly, or things just going wrong with your logic that you can't explain, console logging things is very useful from time to time. And this is all you'll do. You'll just say console.log, pass it in essentially a string or values that you want to display, and they should show up in your console like this, like we just did, right? Now, there is another debugging mechanism that's unique to Lightning Web Components that's very valuable. And if you go to your user record now, which is nice because this used to be much more of a pain. If you go to your user record now and you go to Advanced User Details, there should be this debug mode checkbox on your user. If you check this, you will see this debug mode enabled for Lightning Web Components banner show up. And what that means is if you go over here, so if we're God, I'm so sorry. If we go back to the inspector, like we were just in, you can go to sources. And inside your sources, you should be able to find your Lightning Web Component. I believe, well, I'm not going to get this right, am I? Let's see where this exists. Cool. So within here in sources, you should be able to see this bstaticlightningforce.com, and you're going to find your custom Lightning Web Components inside this modules C folder. This NA225 is going to differ on an org by org basis, but you should find a modules C folder somewhere in here, and it's going to hold your Lightning Web Component as it is when Salesforce is running it. So you can see up here, right, my get accounts variable, which looks very different than the way that I wrote it. You can see my get accounts method, which again looks quite a bit different than the way that I wrote it. But you can see all of these methods in here, and you're able to use the debug console to kind of run things and stop them and display to you the results of these methods, right? So this debug console is super useful, but you can only use it if you have debug mode enabled on your user. So make sure that you enable it on your user. And like I said, this video is already crazy long. I'm not going to go over everything in the debug console here, but I will provide a video that goes more in depth if you're interested in learning how to use even more advanced debugging techniques in your Lightning Web Components. But in many cases, that console log will suffice. Cool. It's not the fastest way. I will say console logging is not the fastest way to debug, quite frankly, anything. But it'll get the job done if you don't want to go investigate the other more advanced debugging mechanisms. Okay, cool. We have gone over so many things. There are a couple that I'd still like to cover. They are the lifecycle hooks. There are a bunch of lifecycle hooks and Lightning Web Components. Now, I'm not going to go over every single one in great detail. And the reason for that is I already have a video that I'm going to link right now that goes over every single one of them in great detail. I mean, extremely detailed, information. So you can go check that out to get more information about lifecycle hooks. But I do just want to show you one really quick so you have an idea of what lifecycle hooks are. At least in this video, you get some kind of introduction to them. So what lifecycle hooks are is when a Lightning Web Component gets loaded into a page, a bunch of the lifecycle hooks fire in a particular order, right? And they are represented more or less as methods in your Lightning Web Component that you can set up and utilize. For instance, one of them is the connected callback method. And this connected callback method runs when your Lightning Web Component is inserted into the document object model. If you don't know what the document object model is, I've got a video for everything, including that, so you can go check it out. But it gets loaded into the document object model, which is just a little bit before it actually renders and displays itself to the user, right? So say, for instance, I wanted to retrieve these accounts from my Apex controller before my users ever saw them, or ever saw my Lightning Web Component, that is. Well, what I would do is I would use this connected callback method, or this connected callback lifecycle hook, right? And what it will do, just because it exists in your Lightning Web Component, is if I say this dot get accounts like so, which again is saying this Lightning Web Components method called get accounts, right? If I call this dot get accounts in here, what we'll see in the Lightning Web Component when we reload it is that this dot get accounts gets called before we ever click that button that we set up. So let's save this. And someday when it saves, maybe, I will reload this and we'll see that those accounts will show up in our console, just like they did before, but before we had to click this get accounts button. So let's open up the inspector, go back to the console over here, make sure we don't have a filter so I am not left confused for a second. And if things load, no promises today. There we go. Oh, I set this debug line, which I shouldn't have done. So it paused because I set that little flag right there. It paused the debugger, but I'm going to resume it. If we go back over here, we should be able to find somewhere. There it is. These are the account records, right? I never clicked that button. I didn't. I promise you. And I'm sure you'll find this too. You can find this easier by just typing in the filter, these are the account records, right? If you don't want to see all that other garbage. But here you can see that we did get the account records before things loaded into the page, and we didn't ever click this button. Now I can click this button and it'll give me a second, that indicator says I did this a second time. But yeah, this is what lifecycle hooks are. In this other video that I have that's like 45 minutes long, I go through every single lifecycle hook, when it fires, how to use it, all that kind of stuff. Lifecycle hooks are extremely valuable. The connected callback is probably the one that you'll use more often than anything else. But there are several others, like rendered callback, render, which technically isn't a lifecycle hook, but is thrown in there. Disconnected callback, you know, if your component leaves the screen, what do you want to happen? Should things get removed? Stuff like that. So lifecycle hooks are super important, so don't forget about them. Another, you know what, sorry. Another thing that I should go over, I'm not going to have enough time to go over in great depth, is error handling or exception handling. There is a video that I made a long time ago for this as well, and I'll link it as well so you can get a little bit more detailed information about, you know, try-catch exception handling. But the last thing I want to go over just quickly is how to use Lightning Web Components as parents or children. So, right, maybe to modularize or make my components a little bit more reusable, I want to create a Lightning Web Component and I want to use it within this template here, right? I'm going to show you really quick how we can create another Lightning Web Component and utilize it within this Lightning Web Component that we've been messing with this entire time. So let's figure it out. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, of course, is create a new Lightning Web Component. So Control-Shift-B, create Lightning Web Component, and then I'm going to make it Child Demo LWC, like so. Cool, and now that I have this Child Demo LWC made, what we're going to do first is we're going to make a custom event that we are going to be able to fire and have our parent component react to. That sounds confusing. I promise it's less confusing than it sounds. We'll figure it out together here in just a second. So we're going to create a method. We'll say event method. That'll work. Doesn't matter what you name it. And it is auto-completing this mostly correct. So I'm going to take the auto-completion here and just explain it to you. So what is actually happening here with this code is we're saying this Lightning Web Component needs to dispatch an event, and that event is a custom event or a new instance of the JavaScript custom event object, which is just available in JavaScript. It's not a unique thing to Lightning Web Components or anything. So we're saying this.dispatch event, new custom event, and custom event takes two parameters, right? It's very similar to what we saw earlier with the wire decorator. It takes two parameters, and the first parameter is the name of your event. This can be whatever you want. I just wouldn't start it with the word on. Don't use the word on. Trust me, it will get very confusing. So you can name this event whatever you want. I'm just going to name this cool event to show you that you can indeed name it whatever you want to. And then the second parameter is this JSON object or JavaScript object, right? And within this JavaScript object, you will create a detail object. And within the detail object, you will create whatever properties is the right name, whatever properties you would like to send back to your parent LWC, right? So I could have another one, not just message, it could be taco, and the taco could be delicious chalupas. I'm gonna have to get Taco Bell soon. Yep. Anyway, so we've got, this is a message from the child component, and we also have this taco property here as well as part of our JavaScript object that we are passing back with this custom event. So right now this custom event isn't going to do anything, right? Even if we created a button that would fire this event method in our child LWC, doesn't matter. It's not going to do anything. It'll try to fire this custom event, but nothing is responding to this custom event. So first things first, let's go into our child component HTML, and we're going to create another one of those lightning buttons that we created earlier. And I'm going to let it autocomplete even though it's completely wrong. And we're going to grab the event method. Oops, grab the event method. And on this on click, we'll say call the event method, please. And this will say fire parent, fire child event, like so. Okay, so now this child component has a way for us to call this event method, which will fire this custom event, this custom JavaScript event. But even though we're firing this event, there is nothing listening for this event. If there's nothing listening for an event, is it even real? I don't know. Who knows? So, what are we going to do about this? Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to import this child, or we're going to display or use this child component within our HTML template here, right? So to do that, we're going to say C dash child underscore demo underscore component, like so. It hates that because I didn't actually name it that. Child underscore demo underscore LWC, like that. Cool. And that should work despite its coloring being strange at the moment. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back here, and I named this cool event. And we're going to say on cool event call this method. We haven't made this method yet, so I'm going to put in the name of a method that we have yet to make in our parent Lightning Web Component, but I'm going to make it in a second, I promise you. So we're going to say, let's see, parent event. We'll just name it parent. Well, parent event handler is a better name for this. Parent event handler. So that way, now we have our parent LWC that is now displaying our child demo LWC component that we just created right here. And in the event that this cool event is triggered or dispatched, we now have something listening for it, right? And you're always going to put this on in front of whatever you named your event over here, right? So I named mine cool event. This will always be on cool event, and then you will call a method name of some sort in your parent component. So now I'm going to go back over here into my parent component's JavaScript, and I'm going to create that method that we just made called parent event handler, like so. Actually, what was the autocomplete there? Pretty good. Pretty good, minus the lack of a bracket. Cool. So now we have this parent event handler, and whenever that button in the child demo LWC is called, it will call the event method, this one here. This event method will dispatch this new custom event. Our Lightning, our LWC is listening for that event. Our parent Lightning Web Component is listening for that event, and then it's going to call this parent event handler method, which will output the information from that event, the detail from that event, which we set up right here, right? So we should see message and taco and all that junk. So let's save all this and hope I didn't make a mistake, because you never know. I make mistakes all the time. Child demo LWC, yep, that should be it. Now there's an important thing. When I make my LWCs, I very rarely use capital letters. I just don't, right? But if I had made this LWC instead of child underscore demo underscore LWC, like that, if I had made it something like child demo LWC, which is really common, instead of this looking like this, instead it would look like child dash demo dash L dash W dash C, like that, right? And that's a little bit confusing because where do all the dashes come from? But the dashes indicate that there's a capital letter, basically, with the exception of this one. This first one is always, it doesn't indicate a capital letter. But all of the rest of these, if you have a capital letter in your Lightning Web Component, you have to put a dash in front of it when you are importing it. So now you know. If you use capital letters, which I don't hardly ever do, that is the end result. Let's deploy this one more time. I think I already did deploy it, but better to be safe than sorry, you know? There is actually one thing I forgot to do, though, so if I don't do that really quick, it will be a problem. In the child demo LWC, let's open up the metadata and change is exposed to true. If we don't do that, then nothing will show up, and that will be a problem. So now let's pull up our Lightning Web Component again. I have already refreshed the page. Cool. We've pulled up our child component again. I refreshed it, but I'll refresh it one more time just so you can see it. There's now this Fire Child Event button, and let's make sure to open up our inspector in the browser and go over to console because we're going to see the output in this console here. So I'm going to click Fire Child Event, and we can see over here in the console that we did get the output we expected. This is the event message. This is a message from the child component, taco, delicious chalupas. So there you go. Now you know how to communicate from a child up to the parent. Now the question is, how would you communicate from a parent down to a child? And that's where that magical API decorator comes in that we talked about earlier on in this video. So let's figure out how to use the API decorator to actually do that communication between our parent and child, or from our parent to our child. So let's head on over to our child demo LWC. The first thing we'll need to do is import API up here, right? Because we need that API decorator to make anything work. The second is we will do API or add API, and we'll say cool property like that. And we will also create a method, and we'll name it, oh my god, cool method, like so. And yeah, sure, we can output that console log. Let's get rid of this extra bracket that was created. Okay, so now we have two different publicly accessible items or things in this class, right? We have one publicly accessible property that our parent Lightning Web Component can access and update, and we have a publicly accessible method that our parent component can access and run, right? So let's first output this cool property into our child demo LWC HTML file, our template file. We'll just make a paragraph tag and do cool property. Make sure I actually spelled that right. Cool property, like so, just so that we can see the output when we update things. So I'm going to save this, save that, and then I'm going to come over here to my parent component, and right here I'm going to put cool property is equal to, wow, such cool, such amaze. 3 was actually better, and it was on accident. And then I'm going to save this, right? And what this is going to do is, because our child demo LWC has this cool property that's available via the API decorator, it's now a public property, right? We can, as soon as this loads, pass in this value to that cool property, variable. I'm struggling with words, man. Okay, so let's bring this up and just see if this works before we start doing the methods. So if we reload this, we should see down here, wow, such cool, such amaze, right? If I didn't have this cool property being filled out here, I think cool property had nothing in it here, right? Yeah, it's got nothing. So if I dropped this, just to prove it's working, if I drop this and save it again, and reload the page here, there will be nothing down there. So good. So that ended up working for us. Now you know how to access publicly accessible properties in your child components. Now the next thing we've got to figure out how to do is, how do we actually call this publicly accessible method, right? This cool method from our parent. And this is a little bit more complicated, but it's not crazy. So let me explain it. This is one of your HTML elements, right? This C child demo LWC. And because it's one of our HTML elements, we have the ability to select it using what's called a query selector in JavaScript. So what we are going to do is, in the connected callback lifecycle hook, so this runs, remember, when the when the component loads into the DOM, we are going to call this publicly accessible method. Actually, we're not going to do it right here. I'm going to make another button. We'll make another button and call it from there. So we'll just say lightning button, and we will call it call child method, and we'll say call child method, like so. Cool. So we're going to come over here, create this call child method, and it surprisingly has already figured out what I'm going to do, which is nice. And so I will explain this to you. We've got this call that is going to call that cool method in our child demo LWC, or this line of code that's going to do that. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying, in this LWC, which is what this represents, in the template, which is this bad boy right here, right, our HTML, it's all of it. You can have multiple templates in here. If I wanted, I could have another template and another one and another one, right? But in this Lightning Web Components template, use the JavaScript query selector to find our child demo LWC and call the cool method, right? That's, well, let's get rid of some of these. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we're selecting this HTML element in our template, and because it has this publicly accessible or API decorated cool method, we can, whoa, getting files mixed up here, we can call that cool method right off of this selector, just like that. And you can do that with any API accessible method. You know, that's how it works. So we'll deploy this, and then we'll see it in action, hopefully. I've got to save the HTML though. Otherwise we won't get our new cool button. All right. let's bring back up our component for maybe the last time today. And we have this call child method now. So I'm going to clear this. And I'm going to just click the call child method. And you can see it output what we expected it to. This is the cool method console log. Right here. It's exactly what we wanted to see. Pretty cool. Now, this video is very long. There are so many more things we could go over. So many more. But I will provide videos in the description for CSS, a CSS YouTube video that's good, so that you will get to see more of how to set up CSS and apply them to HTML elements. I will add an HTML course to this list. I will add a JavaScript YouTube video to this list, or to this description of this video. There is an enormous amount you can go over for LWCs, and if I made this video as long as I'd like, it'd probably be a 20-hour long video. So I'm not going to do that to you. But if you want to learn even more about the markup languages, the scripting languages that go into LWCs, I will of course make all of that available to you in the description. But I hope at the very least this has shown you how to create an LWC. It's shown you some ways to do Lightning Web Component communication. It's given you the tools to learn about things like lifecycle hooks, exception handling, the decorators that you can use that are unique to Lightning Web Components. So hopefully this has been a good starting point. But definitely let me know if I missed anything important that you'd like to see a video on, or whatever else. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was useful to you, and I hope I'll see you next time, whenever I make next week, really. So I hope I see you next week on the next episode of Coding with the Force. I'll see you later.